We can talk now to the former Deputy Prime Minister and Liberal Democrat spokesman on Brexit, Nick Clegg, who's in our Sheffield studio for us this morning. Same question I asked Dominic Raab first of all. Can you just state your position in view of the ruling yesterday?
Well, I think it's a good thing that the judges have said that Parliament has a role and that there's a limit, which is a centuries-old tradition. There's a limit to what governments can do without the say-so of our, the mother of all Parliament. I mean, the irony, the irony is putting it politely, that all these apoplectic Brexiteers this morning are condemning these poor judges for just doing their job and reminding us that that Parliament has a role in our representative democracy. And of course, the rights of Parliament was one of the principal reasons why they said we should get out of the European Union in the first place. And they don't seem to now like it when they're reminded that that's exactly what Parliament should do in this process. So look, I think the government's got nothing to be frightened of. Of course it should come before Parliament, and it should do so, as the judges have said, before they commence these Article 50 negotiations. But the key thing is they must also come before Parliament, since they haven't yet explained what Brexit plan, what Brexit model they want to pursue, and to set out in far greater detail to MPs for debates and votes exactly what model of Brexit the government is pursuing.
So would Parliament be voting on triggering Article 50, or would it be voting on potential legislation or the potential implementation of Article 50? Would there be more negotiations?
So I think you're right to draw a distinction between the sort of very narrowly strict issue, which is Article 50, which is basically it's like a stopwatch. Article 50 is just a timetable. It's just a 2-year timetable, and when you start it, the clock starts ticking for 2 years, and at the end of which, in one way or another, the United Kingdom leaves the European Union. You're quite right in your question to imply that as part of that process, people like me will argue that there's no point sort of pressing the button on a stopwatch if the government doesn't first tell you, where the finishing line is and what they're trying to do in completing the race that
isn't that
has
the
started.
Problem? Apologies for interrupting, but isn't that the problem? Theresa May needs to have a process of negotiation over 2 years with European leaders. Now, you've got to let the process begin before the negotiations can begin.
Well, you can only have that process, of course. This is the point. Unless you explain to people, the British Parliament, and indeed the rest of the European Union, what you are trying to achieve. You can't have a negotiation if you don't tell people what you're trying to achieve. And the reason why, the Daily Mail and all these Brexiteers are so apoplectic this morning is because what's coming back to haunt them is the dishonesty with which they won the argument in the first place. They knew what they were against, the European Union, but they didn't know what they were for. Time is now running out. The government now needs to explain what it is for. Does it believe we should be in the single market or not? In the customs union or not? In the European Union crime-busting arrangements or not? These are fundamental issues which, of course, as part of this process, need to be brought before MPs, and MPs should feel free to scrutinise them. And if they believe that the government is pursuing an unnecessarily hard, in other words, an unnecessarily self-harming version of Brexit, then, of course, MPs should be free to reject that.
Would you, if a vote were put to Parliament now to trigger Article 50, just that vote, shall we trigger Article 50? Would you vote against that now?
You can't trigger Article 50 without knowing what you are triggering it for. That's the point. They are inseparable.
If you weren't given that option, what would you vote?
No, that's not going to happen, because there's going to be legislation which we can amend. So the question is not, are you going to trigger Article 50? Are you going to trigger Article 50 in pursuit of what? A hard Brexit or a soft Brexit? I would vote in favour of Article 50 being triggered in pursuit of a sensible, soft Brexit which does the minimum amount of harm to people's jobs and to the livelihoods of millions of people up and down the country. I would not vote for it if the government chooses to opt, and it would be their choice, but it would be, in my view, a disastrous choice, to go for the most self-harming, hard version of Brexit. In other words, as I think George Osborne quite pithily put it once, people voted on the 23rd of June for Brexit. They didn't vote for hard Brexit. And that is a distinction which I would want to uphold in the votes in Parliament.
Nick Clegg, thanks very much for joining us this morning on Breakfast. Nick Clegg, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you.